My name is Christy Cooper, and I'm currently Director of Clinical Pharmacy for DosMeRx Tabula Rasa Healthcare. I would like to thank the organizers of this pre-meeting workshop for the invitation to speak on a topic that I'm very passionate about. I'm excited to share with you my personal journey that spans across 2 decades of being a pharmacist who has spent the majority of her career in infectious diseases and antimicrobial stewardship. So there are 2 topics that I plan on covering today. The first is to highlight the need and role of antimicrobial stewardship beyond academia, and the second is to describe stewardship careers outside of the traditional academic setting. And I have no disclosures for today's presentation. When you think of the traditional pathway that a pharmacist follows to a career in antimicrobial stewardship, it usually starts with completion of a first-year pharmacy practice residency after receiving a Doctor of Pharmacy degree. Some pharmacists, but not all, may go on to do an infectious diseases specialty residency, otherwise referred to as a PGY2 ID residency. And after that, the usual and customary path is to move into a hospital-based antimicrobial stewardship or infectious diseases pharmacist position with the possibility of a faculty appointment at a college of pharmacy, medicine, or both. There is a wide scope of antimicrobial stewardship responsibilities that we find in these types of positions. Another route in the traditional pathway that a pharmacist could choose after residency is to move into an infectious diseases fellowship. A fellowship tends to be more research-focused position in infectious diseases, and typically this individual will move into a more traditional faculty position. Despite this traditional pathway, we do find that many pharmacists who work in antimicrobial stewardship do not complete a specialty infectious diseases residency. The reality is that there just are not enough infectious diseases residencies to train the massive workforce that is required to support antimicrobial stewardship. If you think about it, in the US alone, there are over 6,000 hospitals and numerous other care settings where stewardship is practiced. If the expectation was that every antimicrobial stewardship pharmacist had completed an ID residency or a fellowship, we would need hundreds of more of these training programs at a minimum to meet these needs. This residency deficit was highlighted in an analysis that was published by Dr. Tim Gauthier and colleagues in Clinical Infectious Diseases a few years back. In this analysis, they created a complete listing of infectious diseases pharmacy residency and fellowships that were listed in the directories for the Society of Infectious Disease Pharmacists, or SIDP, the American Society of Health Systems Pharmacists, or ASHP, and the American College of Clinical Pharmacy, also known as ACCP. They cross-referenced this information with a listing of employment postings for clinical ID pharmacists. As you might expect, what they found is that despite documenting 89 training programs for pharmacists looking to gain more experience in ID, that there still was a perpetual shortfall. The authors concluded, quote, quantitatively and geographically, current opportunities for training and employment were considerably inadequate to fulfill the anticipated future needs for thousands of institutions. Although the number of programs has increased since the article was published, the lack of these specialty training programs has opened the door for the creation of a number of new antimicrobial stewardship certificate programs. My personal career journey started very similar to that traditional career path that I shared with you earlier, with first getting a degree, completing a postgraduate training program, and then moving on to a traditional hospital-based clinical pharmacy role. But after that, I was able to move into some very unique positions in antimicrobial stewardship, which I'd like to share with you a little bit about today. So here's my personal career story that I'd like to share with you. After pharmacy school, I completed a postgraduate pharmacy practice residency at the James A. Haley Veterans Hospital in Tampa, Florida. At that time, 20 years ago, there were not many infectious diseases residencies available. So after my first pharmacy practice residency, I moved into a traditional role as a clinical coordinator at a 180-bed community hospital in the central United States. In this position, I was responsible for a variety of clinical pharmacy programs, including what we referred to at that time as antimicrobial management. Of course, back then, the term antibiotic stewardship wasn't as commonly used as it is today. Following my time at the hospital, I transitioned into two senior-level infectious disease positions. The first was as a clinical director of infectious diseases for Cardinal Health. Cardinal is a diverse company that provides a variety of services within healthcare, and I worked for the group that managed 180 hospital pharmacies across the mainland United States and Puerto Rico. Now, in the early years of that role, the majority of my focus was related to preparing drug information and educational resources, but later, after the 2007 IDSA SHEA guidelines for antimicrobial stewardship were published, most of my focus shifted to helping acute care hospitals implement stewardship programs. And I later had a similar position at Vizient, which is a healthcare performance improvement company. And in this role, I was fortunate to work with a variety of hospitals, including a number of large academic medical centers from across the country. And during my time there, I also helped to lead an antimicrobial stewardship committee that was comprised of 25 thought-leading infectious diseases pharmacists and physicians that met on a monthly basis. And between these two roles, it provided me with the opportunity to work with over 500 hospitals, ranging from as small as 10 beds up to 1,200 beds. Finally, after a long career in these two roles, I recently transitioned into a new position as the Director of Clinical Pharmacy for DoseMeRx, which is part of Tabula Rasa Healthcare. The focus area for my current role is related to precision medication dosing, and I lead the clinical science team that is responsible for bringing pharmacokinetics for antimicrobials and other drugs to the bedside through a Bayesian clinical decision support platform. And finally, in my free time, I have served for over a decade as a member of the Antimicrobial Stewardship Executive Committee for the City of Houston Health Department. And I will share more insight and lessons learned from these roles as we move through this presentation. So now let's look at what career opportunities lie beyond the traditional path of academia. So there are a number of positions that are available outside of academia that touch some or all facets of antimicrobial stewardship. These include corporate or senior level positions in infectious diseases, public health, the pharmaceutical industry, medical diagnostics, technology, including pharmacy surveillance systems, as well as medication safety technologies. The most traditional example of a corporate or senior level ID position in antimicrobial stewardship is in an organization that governs the medical operations of a number of healthcare facilities. These health systems may be for-profit, not-for-profit, or government-based, such as the VA, and typically have a shared ownership structure. These health systems often have both a pharmacist trained in antimicrobial stewardship and ID physician leadership at a senior level. For really large systems, the individuals that occupy these positions may no longer be involved in the day-to-day antimicrobial stewardship activities, but there is a good chance that they started at a single site running a local stewardship program and have just risen up in the ranks. On the other hand, with smaller systems, you may actually have a pharmacist lead or co-lead of the program who is not only responsible for the stewardship activities of the system, but also have these day-to-day responsibilities in managing the program at a single facility. Typically, these individuals are responsible for a wide variety of stewardship and infectious diseases-related activities, which are too numerous to mention here in their entirety. But examples include developing policies and procedures that guide the activities related to the effective use of antimicrobials, creating summaries of new antimicrobials and vaccines that are being evaluated for formulary, and providing oversight or even ownership for the health system antimicrobial use data, include that which may be reported into a national antibiotic utilization registry, such as the CDC's antimicrobial use and resistance module.
Yeah.
A similar position to the health systems position that I just spoke about on the previous slide is a corporate senior level ID antimicrobial stewardship pharmacist that does the same type of work for a group of hospitals or organizations, but these hospitals have a collaborative relationship through some type of formal agreement and don't necessarily have a shared ownership structure. The two positions that I mentioned that I had earlier, including my time at Cardinal Health and my time at Vizient, would fit into these categories. So in this case, I was not an employee of the hospital or health system, but was rather a paid resource that was provided through this formal relationship between the hospital health system and the organization for whom I worked for. In these positions, I was responsible for developing resources, education, and creating research opportunities. Examples of the types of projects that I worked on in these positions included developing clinical summaries of new antimicrobials and side-by-side comparisons, developing dosing protocols for certain medications, creating dashboards of data that could be used for benchmarking, developing educational and training programs for pharmacists and physicians, including multiple antimicrobial stewardship training programs, and developing opportunities for national research projects. One exciting area where pharmacists have emerged as leaders in antimicrobial stewardship is in public health. You may be familiar with the pharmacists that work at the national level at the CDC, but you may not be aware that more recently, a number of state and local health departments have hired their own pharmacists to have on staff. Much of the growth of the pharmacists in the public health sector was due in large part to a number of grants that infused financial resources into these health departments. These grants provided salary support for pharmacists that could help lead the development and implementation of antimicrobial stewardship programs that could be delivered more nimbly by state and local health departments. I have included references to just a couple of the many programs that have pharmacist leads for this very important work. If you recall from a few slides ago, I said my quote hobby is working with the City of Houston Health Department. For a long time, I've been part of the Antimicrobial Stewardship Executive Committee, which is a well-tenured group that is comprised of physicians and pharmacists who volunteer their time and talents to support community-wide antimicrobial stewardship efforts. What I've highlighted for you here on this page are screenshots from our antimicrobial stewardship website. In addition to hosting an antimicrobial stewardship symposium that is held every year in January, we also have embarked on several community-wide projects, including developing a program focused on reducing the overtreatment of asymptomatic bacteria. I can't say enough about the value that comes from volunteering your time or participating in health department-related activities. And my experience with working with the City of Houston Health Department has really been one of the most rewarding of my career. It's also opened doors for me to work with local experts and has created opportunities at the national level. Now, for completeness' sake, I also wanted to acknowledge our colleagues that work in the pharmaceutical and diagnostic industry. And there are a wide variety of positions that provide opportunities to encourage and promote the appropriate use of antimicrobials, as well as vaccination. Individuals that I've met along the way in these positions often do promote the appropriate use of the pharmaceuticals that they support, or highlight how the appropriate use of diagnostic tests can drive earlier and appropriate organism identification, which, as we know, can lead to getting the right drug on board at the right time, which is a key tenet of antimicrobial stewardship. Finally, although these positions are few and far between, some of the larger companies actually employ pharmacists whose sole job is to create programs that help to foster national and international antimicrobial stewardship activities and collaborations. So similar to what I described earlier with public health opportunities for pharmacists, we've seen a similar level of growth in the technology space. Technology that is used in healthcare today to support stewardship efforts include pharmacy surveillance systems, or sometimes we call them antimicrobial clinical decision support systems, and Bayesian clinical decision support systems. I've been fortunate enough to work with many of these clinical decision support systems over the years, including almost all of the companies that you see listed on this slide. In almost every case, there is at least one, if not more than one, clinical pharmacist on their team that has a background in infectious diseases or antimicrobial stewardship. Now, if you're not familiar with these systems, they are frequently used to help support the activities associated with antimicrobial stewardship programs, and they primarily do this through their ability to combine disparate data sets such as patient medication lists, laboratory information, patient location throughout the hospital, and other related infectious diseases information to produce a series of alerts that guide the user to take certain action related to inappropriate or even appropriate antibiotic use. In addition, they also provide the users with the means to track and report antibiotic use as well as resistance. Another area of opportunity for pharmacists with a background in infectious diseases or stewardship includes providing expert support for Bayesian clinical decision support systems. And this software can be used to help guide appropriate dosing for patients receiving medications that can be monitored via therapeutic drug monitoring. Now, many different antimicrobials, such as vancomycin, voriconazole, and aminoglycosides, can have their dosing optimized through the use of Bayesian dosing software. And pharmacists who work for these organizations typically provide clinical and scientific support. So now that we have covered the various types of roles that an antimicrobial stewardship pharmacist can occupy outside of academia, let's transition into some tips and tricks for finding these types of positions. What are some more formal approaches for finding a position that's outside of a traditional hospital or academic position? I think a great place to start is to seek out getting additional certifications or degrees. The most common credential that we see in the infectious diseases pharmacy community is board certification in infectious diseases, or BCIDP. However, if you don't want to go that route, you can always seek out advanced stewardship training through one of the certificate programs that are available. If you decided that maybe one or more degrees just isn't enough, you could consider going back to school and getting an advanced degree that would be a companion to the area of ID, such as a master's in public health. Or in my case, when I wanted to make a career change and combine the love of technology and ID, I actually sought out getting a graduate certificate in biomedical informatics. It's also important to update your LinkedIn profile and highlight all the great work you've done in your field of expertise. If you're interested in seeking out a role in one or more of the categories that I spoke about earlier, you may want to follow or connect with individuals who currently have the type of role that you're interested in. Finally, consider becoming a part-time consultant. I recently attended a meeting where an ID pharmacist who had a full-time job at a hospital served as a consultant to our discussion. And in this case, this creates a nice open door for that individual to come on full-time when a position is available, since they already have a pre-existing relationship with this company. So let's say you want to go a more informal route to finding these types of unique positions. This slide really speaks to the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Networking is of the utmost importance when pursuing these non-traditional roles in antimicrobial stewardship. Of the 4 positions that I shared with you earlier as part of my bio, only one of them came to me through the traditional process of applying for a job. The other 3 were either positions that were created while I was working for that company, or I was approached directly to consider the position because they knew me based on the recommendation from a colleague. Obviously, post-COVID, we'll have to all look forward later on to being in person again and creating those networking opportunities, but you never know when the opportunity to network will present itself. I actually struck up a conversation one time with someone sitting next to me on the DC Metro. She was in a leadership position with a government agency, and after our impromptu meeting, she actually connected me with one of the pharmacists that worked on our team. Now, in addition to, or perhaps now in replacement of, you can also use social media to your advantage for networking. You may want to be strategic in your choice of platform based on your intended goals. If your goal is to get your name out there, perhaps Twitter is the way to go. But if you're looking to connect with a certain demographic of age and experience, or perhaps the people who are responsible for the hiring decisions that are made for these types of positions, perhaps LinkedIn is the better choice. I would also encourage you to get as involved as you can in professional organizations. This is not only a great way to give back to our profession, but it allows you to interact with professionals that you normally wouldn't get a chance to work with. The opportunities abound, and in addition to the contribution that you can bring to the group, you'll also absorb knowledge from your co-committee members as part of your volunteer work. Other ways to increase your experience include to get connected and involved as a volunteer and help support community, regional, and statewide antimicrobial stewardship activities through your state and local health departments. In addition, seek out research opportunities that allow you to connect with other professionals in the infectious diseases community. I've listed a couple of groups here for you that are regionally or nationally based. These are just examples, but at least it'll give you a place to start as you think about ways to expand your horizons. And finally, I'd encourage you to find publication partners. This is a great way to combine networking and research with learning from others. Admittedly, I am probably the poster child for collaborating with external researchers. Here are some examples of the type of work that I've been part of, and not a single person that I've shared authorship with on these papers was someone I worked with. This is a great way not only to network and to get to know others in the antimicrobial stewardship community, but also to learn from an amazingly talented group of other healthcare professionals. So in closing, here are a few take-home messages from our time today. I hope this presentation has given you some insight on the role of stewardship careers beyond academia. In addition, I hope that you can walk away with some tips on how to find these non-traditional positions, which most certainly require non-traditional approaches. I hope I've shown you that networking is extremely important as you seek out these roles, and never underestimate the value of connecting with others, whether it be through research, publishing, or coordinating educational opportunities. Finally, consider seeking out advanced training or certifications to help boost your CV and open the door for new opportunities. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I wish you the best of luck in finding an antimicrobial stewardship position outside of academia.